And there we go. Awesome. So, hello everyone. Good morning. Good morning. Hey, hey. Welcome to DevFest SGF. It's pretty awesome. Excited to be here. I don't know if it's been passed around a little bit, but it was a crazy ride for me to get here. But a lot of fun airport issues yesterday. But a little bit of housekeeping to get out of the way. Who's used Firebase? Show of hands here. So nice little mix. Who's used an app that was built on Firebase? So there should be more hands up. You probably don't realize it was built on Firebase. And then who's built something with Firebase? Gotcha. All right, cool. So got some interesting hands there for that. Work. There it goes. All right. So again, I am Kyle Paul. Prior to joining Google, I was part of a GDG. I was a GDG organizer, much like GDG Springfield here. I was also a Google Developer Expert, which is a program that we have at Google that enables and empowers individuals that are experts in various technologies. So I was an expert in Firebase, Angular, and the Google Assistant. And then I was also part of our Women Tech Makers program, which is another program that we have at Google. And I overheard some conversations earlier that it's one of the events that helps sponsor like the International Women's Day events that many of you probably attended earlier this year and here in Springfield. It's a very fun groups. If you're interested to talk a little bit more about these and how to get involved with our Google programs, come find me. I'm not here all day today, unfortunately, but I'd love to chat with you about these. But with that, and so I am the North America regional lead for our developer programs at Google. So I travel all over the US and Canada, speaking to developers like yourselves, learning what you do in the areas where you are and what tech interests you, and giving fun talks like this at DevFest. But of course, no presentation is without cats. So these are my two little cats, Penny and Jules. They're adorable, and this is one of the very few photos where they're snuggled up together, because normally they're trying to play with each other. So, and with that, so the reason you're here is probably because you create websites or apps, right? So most of you are developers on Android, iOS, web, and we understand, as developers, you understand there's a lot of challenges with writing applications. There's different tools, there's different frameworks, there's different infrastructures that you have to go through to put these apps together. And if you want to create a successful application, the process needs to be more simple. And really, as developers, you just need to build the app. And so who here would identify as a full stack developer? I expected a little bit more hands, but all right, cool. So so those of you that identify as a full stack developer, obviously this is a super simplified version of a full stack, right? So you create and manage multiple databases, there's APIs that you tie into, there's front end, there's other apps that you tie into, clients. There's a whole set of problems when you start bringing in user authentication. So it's a very, very simplified path. This is more what it actually looks like, right? There's all kinds of random connections happening. There's APIs, random multiple databases that you're connecting to. And really, when it comes down to it, the user doesn't care what all of this is like. So this is all complex stuff that you have to deal with as a developer. And what the users actually care about is that it's fast, it works offline, it works on their device. So whether it's a mobile phone, a tablet, a laptop, a TV, a giant presenter screen like this, and they want it to be easy to authenticate. They want to be able to use your application, right? So when the backend comes involved, what database you're using, the user doesn't care. And as we saw when I took the quick hand survey earlier, most of you probably didn't even realize you were using an app built on Firebase, but I would assume that more hands would go up if you knew what the apps were actually using in the back end. Yeah, but with all of those things that I explained, this is where Firebase really shows its strength. There's, for those of you who aren't familiar with Firebase, there's a set of tools that comes together in the console that allows you to build these stronger, better apps to where you don't need to really focus on this whole infrastructure bit. You can just build your app and launch it super fast, super efficiently to your users. And there's a slew of tools that I'll talk about here in a second that, when you use Firebase, you don't have to use all of these together. You can use, mix and match, pick different ones that apply to your application. So if you're writing an Android and iOS app, you might not need half of these things up here. If you're writing a web app, you're not going to need the other half of the things up here. But you have the flexibility to pick and choose what you need for your application. And they have this divided up into develop, grow, and earn. And this allows you to build your application, scale your application, and then also make money off your application, because that's an important thing, right? Making some money out of what you're building. So that's a lot of the fun stuff there. And so let's dive into some of the tools and services available to build your application. And so we're going to dive into each of these one by one. So you have the RealTime Database, the Authentication, Cloud Storage, Hosting, and Cloud Functions. Those are the ones we're going to really touch on today. So RealTime Database. Those of you who raised your hands earlier on developing with Firebase, have you used the RealTime Database? Just show of hands, you don't have to yell at me. Cool. All right, so those of you who aren't aware of the RealTime Database, it's a NoSQL database, which is JSON-based in this particular one. There's also Firestore, which is another database that's offered by Firebase. It's not JSON-based, but it is still NoSQL. It's a document collection style database. So it's more akin to like MongoDB if you've used MongoDB before. But the catch is they're both real time. They both work offline. There's also all these other advantages that you can use. The data, whenever you write it to the real-time database, it's synchronized between all of the devices in milliseconds. So everybody who's connected automatically receives it without having to refresh, without having to load the page again. It's automatically synced across everything. And I have an example of that here in a little bit. And one really awesome thing was actually just announced yesterday. So prior to yesterday, you could have 100,000 concurrent connections to your application. As of yesterday, they doubled it. It's now 200,000 concurrent connections to your application. So that way you can have that many users per second using your application. And there's no lag, it's all real-time updating per second. So imagine a lot more screens up here. And then who's built an authentication system by themselves or with a team? Yeah, it is incredibly difficult. Building it from scratch, doing all the hashing, making sure everything's secure, and then you have to build the whole forgot your password process. It's a vicious cycle, and if you miss something, you wind up with breaches or leaks and all kinds of fun stuff. So fortunately with Firebase, you don't have to deal with that anymore. And what's awesome, like I mentioned earlier, you can use these different pieces of Firebase individually to where you don't actually have to use any of the rest of the tools if you just want to integrate Firebase Authentication into your application to make your application stronger. And so there's different authentication options available on Firebase. You have the email and password, which is traditional that everybody has, but it helps you with the whole forgot your password process, the securing of the password, all of this stuff. But then you can also tie in the different social authentications. You have the Google authentication, Facebook authentication, Twitter authentication. You can also roll your own authentication if you want to use like LinkedIn authentication or Microsoft Live authentication. You have all these other options that you can roll together. It also uses the phone number authentication. If you're building a mobile app and you want to link a phone number, there's that available through this as well. And then the other fun advantage to this, it's an open source UI library. So where if you're using just a front-end developer language, you can drag and drop this authentication UI library to where you don't have to build a whole lot of the authentication pieces. You just kind of add it to your application and it works. It's great. And of course, you know, because it's part of the whole Firebase console, it's integrated with all the other Firebase tools. So backing up for a second. So all these other things up here, Firebase Authentication ties into each one of these to where it can control who has read-write access to the database, who has read-write access to the cloud storage, who has access to receive a certain notification, all of these kind of fun things. So with authentication, it's super, super powerful if you tie it to other parts of Firebase. An example, like I just mentioned, is the user control access. So who has access to even see that data coming out of the database? So you can get very granular with this. And then in March 2017, Firebase announced the Cloud Functions for Firebase, which another quick survey. There's going to be a lot of hands making sure everybody's awake. It's very early. So who here are AWS developers? All right, so there's an interesting mix here. Cool. So those of you from AWS, you might be more familiar with Lambda functions. This is, Google's version of that, even though this came out first. But so Cloud Functions are a way that you can, on the server side, with very minimal code, run a function that's short-lived. It's a serverless process to where it runs in a small container, does its process, and dies. And they can also run asynchronously. And so you can have things like you do back-end process on user authentication. So for example, if a user logs in, you're using the authentication piece to authenticate them, and then instead of waiting for the client to process that information, you can have the client automatically go to the next screen, while on the back end, you're building the database structure for that user. So where you're collecting their name, their email address, their profile picture, if it happens to be from a social login. So you can do all that processing on the back end with the Cloud Function instead of having to let the client sit there and spin while that user is being created. So lots of fun things that you can off-put with that. Some other things is tracking the analytics conversion events to where you have the analytics processing just happening there on the server in the cloud and not delaying your client side at all. Other things are the real-time database updates to where if there's a change to the database, again, you don't have to put that on your client side. So whether it's in your mobile app or the web app, all of that you can off-put back onto the server to where it's running in these micro, super fast serverless functions and relieving the client side from having to do any heavy lifting whatsoever, like sending an email or generating a thumbnail. All of that can happen in the cloud to where you don't have to do anything on the client side. The other fun thing is it could also do HTTP endpoint calls to where instead of your client side having to go make a third-party API request, you can off-put that again to the Cloud Function. And that can process everything for you and then live update your client side. The key thing to know, it's an event-driven model here, so it has to be triggered. It's not necessarily going to run by itself. There is a way to make it akin to a cron job. If you're, those of you who are more familiar with that term, you can do some event scheduling with it, but it is still an event-driven process. So something has to trigger it to run this function. The other thing is, so I do have an example of kind of what this looks like. So those of you who have done anything with the Google Assistant, you might be familiar with the product called Dialogflow. And Dialogflow uses the Firebase Cloud Functions in the back end, if you have ever dug into that console at all. So whenever you're wanting to write a webhook for a Google Cloud, an action on Google. So here's an example where it comes around after it comes into Dialogflow, that webhook piece right here. So that's actually running a Firebase Cloud Function to go figure out where this data is coming from and serve that endpoint back to the user in a on the Google Assistant. So whenever you're using Google Assistant and you happen to use something that's just not built into the typical, like, hey, Google, what's the weather? Or some function like that, when you're actually using an application, it's most likely going to be using Firebase. So those of you who have used a Firebase application, raise your hand. Yeah, more hands popped up this time. Yes, so very cool, right? So there's this whole process that Firebase entangles with here. The other really awesome thing that, I believe, I'd have to confirm this. I'm looking for the organizers to nod their head when I say this, but potentially the DevFest SGF site is hosted on Firebase? It is. So yes, so those of you who've been to the website, everybody should raise their hand now. So, so yes, so Firebase Hosting is another option that's made available to developers. The awesome part is it's free. It's a global CDN that's free. And the catch is it's static. So it's, by static, I mean HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. You can use your Angular, you can use your React, you can use your Vue, because those compile down to HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. So it's not going to serve your PHP, it's not going to serve your Java, but you have your static hosting that's a free global CDN, and it's free up to 5 gigs, but if your site is that huge, we need to refactor it a little bit. The other thing is you get a free SSL by default as part of this as well. You can also, yes, it's whatever your application.firebaseapp.com. However, you can make it, you can add your own custom domain to it as well for free. I mean, you buy your own domain, and then you can link it to your Firebase project, and you could use that for free as part of your Firebase project. The other thing is with your hosting, that also ties into the cloud functions that I was talking about before. So anything that you do with this hosting is also tied into your cloud functions. You can control how it serves or the interactions that happen within your hosted site. All come back to the Firebase Cloud Functions, along with the authentication. So everything ties together. It's super awesome. And then the other very cool feature is the cloud storage options that are available with Firebase. There's a very generous free tier here. I don't remember quite remember how many gigs you're allotted, but it's very, very generous on here. And this is where you're going to be storing your binary files, your PDFs, your large images, your videos, these kind of files. So you do not put these as part of your hosted website. Put these in cloud storage, and you can link them together to your hosted site. There's internal URLs that it can use, so that way only your application has access to it, but then you can also serve up an external URL if this is an item that your user may need to download. So you have that security built in, as well as that flexibility to extend it out to your users. And then, like the database, the user authentication gets very granular here with the cloud storage. So if that PDF was generated for that user, only that user can see that PDF. You can get that granular down to the file level. It's very, very cool, very, very secure. And then some fun advantages here. There's a long list of advantages, but I'm only going to talk about a couple. So the first thing, like I talked about before, authentication is hard. And Firebase makes that very, very easy on how to set up any of these into your application. The password encryption nightmare, tricky social authentication setup. If you've ever used like OpenAuth or anything like that, it's very, very similar, but you do have the accessibility to greater secure your Firebase application using the Firebase authentication. There's also what I like to call the AutoMagic API. So if you're using the RealTime Database, you're using the Firestore database, as you fill in the database, it creates an API for you on the back end using the either the JavaScript library, the Angular library, all of these. So as you build it out, it's essentially an API that you tie into. You don't have to make necessarily the advanced SQL calls, if you will, to where you have to open up the database, you have to connect to the database, write your SQL query, receive the response, and then turn it into something. With Firebase, you're already connected through your application process using WebSockets, and then you just request the data that you're looking for. It's similar to like a select statement, but it's an API string that you're building. So it's very, very simple, very, very easy to build out. And everything's synced to all of your users. The other thing I mentioned previously as well is the security is at the node level. So by node, I mean of the JSON tree, if you're using the real-time database. And so you can secure down to that particular node of the JSON tree that this user has read-write access, or the admins have read-write access to this. It's very, very secure. You can do a lot more than you can with typical Microsoft SQL or MySQL authentication. It's very, very secure here. And then, as I mentioned before, you have the free global CDN. I'm going to repeat that again, a global CDN. So wherever your application and your users are, they have access. But there's a catch. It's on the next screen. And then the other huge advantage is no infrastructure. You don't have to manage any servers. You don't have to manage any virtual machines. It does it all for you. So all you have to do is spin up the Firebase project and build your app. That's about it. So everything's managed at auto scales up and down for you. There's really no reason to not use it unless you're getting to, there's reasons to not use it, but yeah, as for general mobile applications, web applications, it makes it super, super easy. And the other thing is you don't have to deal with any ISPs downtimes or failovers. It automatically handles all of that for you because of Google's massive data center network. It's everywhere. However, there's a couple disadvantages here, and I'm not going to highlight these. I'm going to walk through each one of these because there are some catches here that as developers we need to be aware of. So if you're using the real-time database, it does have limited querying capabilities. So it is a NoSQL database. It is a JSON tree. You're not going to be doing advanced joins. You're not going to be doing advanced where clauses or grouping. I mean, it does have simplified versions of this because it's designed to be fast. It's designed to, it's all based on how your data model is created. So, however, on the Firestore side, it does have some more advanced querying capabilities, but that is one catch that most developers miss is, they're coming from the traditional SQL side and thinking they could do a lot of similar with the NoSQL side. So those of you who haven't done any NoSQL yet, make sure to brush up a little bit on the NoSQL side because there is a difference there. And that's, that's the other caveat is many developers aren't familiar with NoSQL. And so having your SQL skills don't necessarily help you out here. So it's a much different style of how you data model a database. And the best advice I can give you if you're using the real-time database, essentially, and this is, there's going to be some gas probably, but build your front end first before you build your data model. Because your data model in Firebase, real-time database, is how it reflects your front end. As how your users move through the web app, how your users move through your mobile app. That's how you should design your data model to be more effective, to be easier to query on the real-time database. The other disadvantage that some companies feel is that there is no on-prem version, well, on-premises version, which means that it has to live on Google servers, it has to live in the cloud, and it's for most of us it's not a disadvantage, but there are some companies that are ultra protective of this. So that's something to be aware of if your company happens to be one of those. However, it's not a disadvantage for most developers, but that's something that I want to put on here just because some people want an on-prem version of things. The other thing is, while yes, the security is super advanced, you have a lot of flexibility, there is kind of a learning curve to the security because it's not just, I want to protect this part of the tree, it's more complex than that. You have to write JSON security rules in order to secure that node or secure that part of the tree. So it's a little bit different style of writing security logic for this, because you're writing to the data or the file, not necessarily to the folder, if you will. The other thing that some people feel as a disadvantage is that you have to use a Google login in order to use the application. Again, it's another thing they kind of have to put on here, because you can't just log in with a normal email and password. You have to use your Google authenticated, not necessarily Gmail, but just an account that you've authenticated with Google in order to use Firebase. Some companies, when I've given this talk in the past, have an issue with this, and so that's why it's up on my list. And then the other thing is it's currently blocked in China. And so that's where I said, the previous caveat here on the global CDN, except in China, because everything's currently blacklisted there. And so if you happen to have any customers in China, that's something to be aware of on this. But everywhere else, thumbs up. Cool. And now for a demo to kind of show you some powers here. Where's my mouse? All right. Whoa, too much. Come back. There it is. Come back. All right. Wow, that is really up there. All right, sweet. So, here, let me have you do this first. Sorry. Oh, it looks like a couple of you already hit it. But yeah, so if you go to this bit.ly link really quick on any device, your phone, your tablet, your laptop. I wanted to get the practice round in there to do that. But yeah, so it's bit.ly, capital Firebase, capital sample. So if you hit that, presenting on a massive screen. So yeah, so here you can see I'm not refreshing the page, but as users join, refresh. So yeah, if you want to keep refreshing or whatever, you'll see that the counter is going up, the active visitors are going up, and right now the previous visitors are like buried on the page, but this is an example of the real time happening. So, oh, we got somebody power refreshing over here. So yes, so awesome. But yeah, so you can see this is an example of the WebSockets in use, how real-time is working. And this is just the simple JavaScript library for Firebase. So nothing super advanced here that's happening behind the scenes. It's just the JavaScript library at work. And I have this code posted up on GitHub if you want to check it out. Links are later. But yeah, so this is just a fun, quick example of what's available on Firebase, on how everybody's seeing kind of something similar. But again, I'm not refreshing; it's just working. All right, and then on to the next demo while we're doing this. If I can find it. All right, this is another one for you guys to button mash. All right. So hopefully this QR code's big enough for you, but if you want to join this, and then the 348392 is the code for this. And so this is, fair warning, there might be a little bit of bugs in this, but this is just a simple quiz application. It's what they call a two-screen application, to where up here on the big screen is going to be the game board, and all of your devices will be, think of it like Wheel of Fortune at home or something like that, where you're going to answer the questions on your device, but the question is going to be up here on the screen. So, cool. We have a bunch of people joining in. Anybody still joining? Still needing a second? All right, got a couple hands. What's that?
Sorry, some of the names.
Oh, some of the names? Yes. Yes. Pay me pants? Yes. Yeah, you do not have to use a real name here, but everybody good? Thumbs up? Anybody still need time? All right, we're good? All right. So get ready, because the question's going to be up here and answer on your device. And again, this is all Firebase in the background that's now controlling all of your phones. So, question, 3, 2, 1. All right, and I can't read it from down here. Firebase uses the blank model. So pub sub, triggered, event driven, or request reply. 2 seconds left. And we got a bunch with the, oh, we got a unicorn in here. Nice. So good job, everyone. All right, next question. 5 seconds. This is huge. What is the service that Firebase does not offer? Is that Firebase email, Firebase Authentication, database, or hosting? Oh, it's not in the same order? Well, pick the right answer. I warned you there might be some bugs. Cool. I warned you there might be some bugs. All right. Firebase data is formatted in plain text, binary, XML, or JSON. Oh, we got some dollar signs in there. Yeah, there's some bugs. Sorry, I apologize. I warned you. I warned you. It depends on the size of the audience sometimes. Oh, yes. 3 seconds left. Multiple clients, iOS, Android, or web? Sweet. Oh, we got Mitt Romney in here too. Awesome. All right. So thank you all for playing. Yes, it's.
It struck me from being number 1, dang it.
Oh, I'm sorry. But yeah, so yes, just a quirky little example. I built it really quick, so apologies for the bugs, but this is just another fun example of how you can build an application and how it works real time with, what do we have in here, roughly, I'd say about 80 to 90 attendees in here. So yes, it was being hammered quite a bit. You know, the bugs were on my code. It wasn't on Firebase, I promise. I will take the blame for that. Send me a pull request. But yeah, so this is just another fun example of how you can make an application interactive, how it was updating in real time all of your devices. Maybe not as efficiently, but it worked. And cool. Let me bring that back down here. I'm getting good at this massive screen. Cool. And so this was the pop quiz. Cool. And then if you want to learn more about Firebase, like the documentations, a lot of the fun stuff, we also have a lot of code labs that are available. So if you hit the second link there, or I guess this side, we have a lot of code labs on how you can use AdMob with your applications, how you can set up analytics, how you can do hosting, authentication, all of these fun features that I talked about today. We have code labs that walk you through step by step on all of this. And yes, this was an intro talk, and I'm sorry there wasn't a whole lot of code showing up on screen, but how much time? 10 minutes left, so I can walk through some of the stuff, but if we have questions, Jordan has a Q&A mic, but with that, that's Firebase. There's a lot of tools, high quality apps, and how, I didn't talk deeply on how you can make money with it, but there's a lot of code labs for that as well. And building on Firebase allows you to focus on your users and building out your business rather than getting stuck on infrastructure. And that's it. Cool. And this is me on the Twitterverse and me on GitHub. If you want to spam me with PRs for this project, I'd love it. It needs a little TLC, obviously. Cool. And that's it. Thank you.
Cool. If anyone has a question, I'm going to try running around. And so if you just want to raise your hand, I'll come to you. Okay.
So I work at a digital agency, and that's where my question is coming from. But we put a content management system or CMS behind everything we do because you don't want to have to go through a developer to change content. Are there CMS systems or packages that are kind of meant to work well with Firebase, or would you just kind of need to build your own from scratch?
Very good question. There is one that I'm aware of that it's effectively a CMS built for Firebase. The name is escaping me at the moment, so let me look it up and I'll tell you. It's got fire in the name, but yeah, there is one that's been growing and gaining some user adoption. I've used it a little bit. It's how it manages the content and everything is very similar to a traditional CMS. It's not going to be necessarily part of your application. It's going to be a separate application. Most users kind of roll their own CMS, if you will. So there's a backend to the website that the admin or content creators can log into and update on that side. And obviously, because it's real time, the changes reflect instantly. So, but yeah, but typically I've seen most people just kind of roll their own as part of the app that they're building. Gotcha. Cool. Good question.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Oh, he's very comfy.
What type of project would be better suited using a real-time database versus a Firestore?
Ooh.
Or what are the pros and cons of each?
Pros and cons of each.
FlameLink is the CMS client you were looking for. It's called FlameLink.
FlameLink, yes, thank you. Yes, it was right there. Yes, thank you. Yeah, FlameLink is the one. Yes. So advantages between real-time and Firestore. So with it's really so on the web side, natively Firestore has offline capabilities. On the real-time database for web, real-time doesn't have. You have to add that to your application. It doesn't come natively with the real-time database, so that's the big difference coming from the web side. On the mobile side, there's really no difference other than how you want to model your data, because with the Firestore, it's document collection style, and then more advanced querying capabilities, and then on the real-time database, it's the JSON style of database and limited querying capabilities. So it depends on the advanced architecture of your application and how much querying you need. So that's kind of the greatest pros and cons between the two. They both have the real-time synchronization. They both have the offline capabilities. I mean, except that web caveat between the two. But other than that, I mean, they both work with Firebase Authentication, the cloud storage, hosting, all the fun features. So, yeah, cool. And obviously, the data models are going to be very different between the two because of the database structures. So, yep, cool.
Okay, we have time for one more if anyone else has any questions. Oh, in the very back.
All the way in the back row.
Yeah, so you mentioned that it's static hosting only. So let's say I had need for something else. Would it be possible to use Firebase for the CDN on my front end resources and maybe even for the data store, and then connect to some, let's say some other cloud hosting provider, so that I could run my Node app or my PHP app or whatever?
Gotcha. Good. Yes, good question there. So if you're using the front end hosting for the HTML, CSS, JavaScript, whatever framework that you happen to be using to get that dynamic feel like Angular provides or React would provide. So yes, you can do that and then pair it with another backend. I've built a few applications using App Engine on the backend to where, so you can have App Engine doing some more of the heavy lifting server-side process, but that's also what Cloud Functions provide to you as well. To where, and because I guess one thing I forgot to mention there is Cloud Function is node-based. So when you're writing a Cloud Function, it's using Node 8 on everything. If my memory serves correctly, I don't recall the actual version offhand, but Yeah, all your cloud functions are served using Node. So if you want to break down your server-side processes that you're trying to do into smaller functions to run as a cloud function, that it's totally possible to keep it all in the same wheelhouse, so that way your authentication still works and all of that. But or you can totally tie into insert cloud provider here, if you want. So
Thank you.
cool.
All right, thanks
Thank
for
you, everyone.
questions. Thank you, Kyle.
Oh, cheers.
Okay, we're gonna switch laptops here. I realized I think I forgot to say my name at the beginning.